Well, good morning, everyone. Before we get into the sermon, one of the things I wanted to do this Sunday as well as next week is just to hear from people in our church of how they have been practically implementing what we have gone through the last 4 Sundays in this series, The Art of Neighboring. So we have Carrie Larned up here. If you don't know Carrie, she is awesome. And Carrie is just going to share essentially, hey, what has this series impacted her and Kelly and their family in terms of how they neighbor?
All right, so when we started The Art of Neighboring, I really had to just ask God for courage to reach out to our neighbors because I maybe knew 2 neighbors. We moved in September and didn't really know any of our neighbors. So I just started to pray for courage because I don't naturally reach out to people. I love people, but I am not very courageous when it comes to starting up a conversation with small talk. And so like week 1, I was driving my car down the alley, and at a really inconvenient time, one of our neighbors was outside. So I felt the tug to have to stop and introduce myself, and that led to meeting Isaac and Kristen, who have 2 young boys. And we were having people come over, and long story short, we ended up inviting them to come crash the party that we were having. It was a birthday party for a friend, and we invited them to crash, and they were courageous enough to jump in and hang out with the crazies that we hang out with. And since then, we've had dinner with them a couple times. Yesterday, we were at their son's birthday party. And then one other neighbor, when we were standing one night talking to Kristen and Isaac, one of our neighbors came outside and mentioned that they had just lost a family friend from cancer. And we just left some flowers and a condolence card, and hey, if you need anything, here's our phone number. And she called and said, oh, thank you so much. So Kristen and I were talking this last week, and they said that they were going to be around this weekend. And they've lived in the neighborhood for 3 years and don't really know very many neighbors. So I said, hey, if you guys want to come over, we'll be around on Monday. And I said, oh, if you want to invite a few neighbors. At last count, she had invited 10 neighbors. And I was like, well, I better step up my game. So as we were hanging out yesterday, we saw one neighbor pull into a driveway. So Kelly's like, where are you going? I'm like, hey, a neighbor just pulled up. So I was like, hi, I'm Carrie. And she's like, hi, I'm Lauren. I said, hey, we're having a barbecue in the back alley. Because the way our houses are, there's no front yards. And basically what's ended up happening is I've now, even over the course of the last few days, I think I told you it was like 7 people that I met over the last few days that we've invited to just come last minute and have a barbecue. And everyone is really excited. So one of the things that I've learned is people are really longing for community. They're just waiting for someone to invite them. We went to another party last night, which is a whole nother story. But in the course of that night, that evening, I learned that this neighbor has a problem with another neighbor, and she doesn't know why. And so you may just be the bridge to your other neighbors who maybe there's a history because they've lived there for a long time or whatever. But don't wait for your neighbors to do it. I will tell you, because like I said, I am not the person who will go knock on doors and be like, hey, I hate small talk. But I have never felt so energized by getting to know people with just the intention of getting to know them and let them know that if they need something, we live next door. So, come ask for sugar if you need it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, let's go ahead and clap for Carrie. So if I hear correctly, is it you've met 7 new neighbors really almost kind of just in the last couple of days, and you're doing a Memorial Day barbecue tomorrow that they're all going to?
Yes. Kristen, my neighbor who's been here for 3 years, actually, when I mentioned that just invite whoever you know, because I know that she only knew a few neighbors. she said, "This is what we wanted when we moved to this neighborhood." So it's almost like Kelly and I have been a catalyst for her to be able to reach out to the people that she already knew, and then it's stretched us to invite the people. Look, I have neighbors that don't speak English. There's something called Google Translate. I literally knocked on their door, said, "Just so you know, on Monday, there's going to be a lot of activity in the back, and you're invited to come." And I said, just in case, because I know English, their English is way better than my Chinese, but I said, wait, but I translated it. So then I played it, and it responds, and it says what I said in Chinese. So they're like, okay, great, what time?
That is awesome. So there is truly no excuse for you not to get to know your neighbor if Carrie can cross communications from English to Chinese.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
You're
Carrie.
welcome.
I love that. Let's give her a round of applause. So on that note, at the Information Center today, as well as next Sunday, we end this series next Sunday, there are going to be 2 handouts. One looks like this, the other looks like this, and they are just literally practical tips as to how you can engage your neighbor. Literally, for some of us, this will scare us, but one says Neighborhood Block Party Kit. Literally, an easy how-to guide to organize a neighborhood block party. This one's a little intense, but if you want simple things, the other one covers that. And so we would just encourage you to take one of these at the Information Center, because what all of this is about isn't just talking about it. We actually want to take Jesus seriously and to be literally good neighbors for the sake of the kingdom of God. And so we'll hear from someone else next Sunday. If you have some stories that you would like to share, please email me or text me, and I would love to have that conversation with you. Let me start us off this morning with a story. Around the year 2000, there was a lady in her late 30s, and her name was Rosaria. She's still alive. Her name is Rosaria. And Rosaria, here's what you need to know about her. She was as far left, politically speaking, as one could be. So to make this really clear, Rosario is a radical lesbian feminist who's in a relationship with another woman who is an animal activist and nature lover. Okay? So, it doesn't get any more far left on the political spectrum than that. Again, not making value judgment statements, just naming it for what it is. Now, I'm kind of new to Chino. That demographic doesn't tend to be in this area. And another interesting thing about Rosario is that she is a tenured professor at Syracuse University in New York. She does research on postmodern critical theory, which is, I don't even know what that is, but it has something to do with literature. And her specialty is in gay and lesbian studies. Okay? So Rosario, fair enough to say, probably not the type of person that we usually associate with following Jesus. Just kind of throwing that one out there. She develops an interest in wanting to learn more about conservative Christianity. And so she begins to do a bunch of research. And at this time, you got to know, she's like this rising administrator, this huge community activist. In fact, at this time, she's actually one of very, very, very few women in the U.S. that is a tenured university at a research university. And so she starts to do this research because she wants to write a book. And she wants to write a book on essentially why Christianity is so bad, is such a threat to our culture and our society today. And this, I don't think, comes as a surprise, considering kind of the lifestyle that she's in. So she begins researching conservative Christianity in America, and she decides to write an editorial in a New York newspaper. And what she does is she essentially slams a well-known men's ministry conference, Promise Keepers, if you know what they are, And she just kind of just bags on them for their gender politics. Now, of course, no surprise, she gets a lot of responses. She gets a lot of hate mail, and she gets a lot of fan mail. One person who wrote her in was this Reformed Presbyterian pastor. Clearly on the other end of the spectrum than Rosaria. But he writes her in a very kind, sensitive, thoughtful, polite way, which most of the responses weren't that. And so she reads this, and it just stood out to her. Wow, okay, here's this guy on the other end of the spectrum than me, and he's writing kind, thoughtful. He disagrees with me, but he's being kindful and thoughtful and sensitive about it. So she begins thinking, well, hold on here. I'm doing research on conservative Christianity. I want to write a book. Why don't I get to know this guy? And by the way, in his letter, he said, hey, I would love to have you over for dinner. He's married. He didn't mean it that way. So she takes him up on his offer. So, I mean, this is the craziest thing. You have Rosaria as far left, politically speaking, as you can think. And she writes in this book that she's driving to this Reformed Presbyterian pastor's house. She gets to the driveway, she puts her car in park, and she just has this moment where she's like, what in the world am I doing? Like, I'm going to have dinner with this guy who completely disagrees with everything about me. He's an enemy in my worldview. We should not be hanging out. But he's opening up his house to me. Rosaria is shocked as to what happens. She leaves his house that night after dinner and finds herself oddly, extremely curious about him and his wife and what they believe. And she goes back for another dinner, and then another dinner. And a couple years later, another dinner. Time and time again of hospitality, of love, of value, of conversation. And Rosaria becomes a follower of Jesus. We have a picture of her, I think. So there she is, to put a name to a face. Her name is Rosaria Butterfield. She's written 2 books. Highly recommend her. Fantastic writer. And a crazy life story. Here's why I start this morning with that story. You have someone as far from God as what we usually associate. And because of someone's hospitality, they change their life and become a follower of Jesus. That is about as transformative as it gets. I'm going to read a quote from her. She writes this: radically ordinary hospitality. Those who live it see strangers as neighbors and neighbors as family of God. They recoil at reducing a person to a category or a label. They see God's image reflected in the eyes of every human on earth. Those who live out radically ordinary hospitality, and listen to this, see their homes not as theirs at all, but as God's gift to use for the furtherance of his kingdom. They open doors, they seek out the underprivileged. They know that the gospel comes with a house key. So she develops this phrase called radical ordinary hospitality. The idea that the gospel comes with a house key. That's exactly what I want us to look at this morning. We're in this Art of Neighboring series, obviously, but in some ways, this whole series you can actually sum up in one word, and that is hospitality. And so this morning, we're just going to zoom in on that word. What is hospitality? And obviously, far more importantly, what in the world does Jesus have to do with that? One book I read this week said this about hospitality. In fact, it's the name of the book. Hospitality is the simplest way to change the world. Rosaria Butterfield would be an example of that. So what's interesting, though, as Christians, right, we go to the scriptures. They're our authority for life, for what we do, how we form our faith. And what's fascinating is that the Bible, from the very beginning to the end, is actually full of examples and commands of hospitality. But I don't think those get highlighted that much. Like, honestly, how many sermons have you heard about hospitality? Lisa Anchor, thank you. So after today, it'll be one. Right? Why don't we talk about it? I mean, it's all over the scriptures. So if you look at the early church, after Jesus comes and he sets up his disciples and the church grows, we're going to look at their letters, and their letters are absolutely full of commands and examples of biblical hospitality. So we're just going to cruise through a couple. I think you'll get the point real quick. Romans chapter 12, verse 13, we'll put this up. Don't worry about turning there. It doesn't get any more short and sweet than this. Practice hospitality. The last two words of that. Just straight up. Practice hospitality. Next one, 1 Peter 4, 9 through 10. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Right? So remember that next time your crazy, dysfunctional family comes over for Christmas and Thanksgiving. Don't do it, or do it without grumbling. Each one of you should use whatever gift you've received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. Lisa, I just realized why you're so into this. Lisa is probably the hospitality queen, which is a high compliment. So we get one another. Anyways, Hebrews chapter 13, 1 through 2. Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. And here it is. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. Check this out. For by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. That's a whole other conversation. The Greek word for hospitality used in these is philoxenia. Philo, think of the city Philadelphia. The city of Philadelphia is called what? The city of brotherly love. Xena means stranger or guest or other. So you put those together, the Greek word hospitality literally means love of stranger. That's what hospitality is when you love someone that you don't know, or they're a guest or something like that. Now the opposite of it, let me get this right. The Greek word is xenophobia, which means fear of stranger. Here's an interesting passage that isn't usually talked about. 1 Timothy chapter 3, I believe. We are given qualifications for elders, or overseers, or leaders, pastors in the church. Let me read some of the qualifications for you. 1 Timothy 3:1. Here is a trustworthy saying. Whoever aspires to be an overseer or an elder desires a noble task. Now the overseer is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, and hospitable. Able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. That's fascinating. A character trait, to be an elder, to be a pastor, to be a leader in a church, apparently, according to Paul, is to be hospitable. Now, I've never seen a pastoral job requirement. I've never seen an elder qualification list, and we actually just put some out a month, and I think we got to change this, that says, hey, you need to tithe, you need to be in a life group, you need to be in a committed lifelong male-female marriage. We put all that stuff, and that's important, but I've never seen be hospitable. But it's right there in the scriptures. Here's the last verse I want us to see, and this is kind of the core of this morning, Romans 15:7. Paul writes this, therefore, welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you. Therefore, welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you. I think this gets to the core of it. Think about this. The early church, okay, let's go back to like 32 AD. The early church explodes and grows exponentially, not because of some brilliant ministry strategy, not because of some brand new building, though those things are great. The early church explodes numerically because they actually get hospitality, because they welcome others, because they get the grace of God. The early church, and you see it in their letters, they say, hey, we need to welcome others because that's exactly what Jesus has done for us. Hospitality is a gospel issue. They understood, like, man, God has shed his grace for us. The least we can do is to welcome other people into our houses. I think that is what Rosario Butterfield gets at with the phrase, the gospel comes with a house key. Think about this. We worship a hospitable God who wants to create a hospitable people to reflect his nature. The entire Bible, from beginning to end, is a story of hospitality. Two authors, I referenced their book earlier. They write this. The Bible begins with God making a home for humanity to dwell with him in a garden. And the Bible ends with God making a home for believers to dwell with him in a city. Throughout the saga of history, God consistently initiates relationship. He's a gracious host, constantly welcoming in wayward sinners who deserve his wrath. A people whose only hope is that he would show them undeserved hospitality. If there's ever been a stranger in need, someone completely excluded and hopeless, fully dependent on the grace of another, that is us. We are out in the cold, victims of our own folly, freezing to death from the coldness in our own hearts. And all through history, God opens the door, rescues us, and welcomes us back into relationship through sheer, inexplicable grace. See, this whole topic of hospitality, which is, I think, probably the pivotal moment in this whole art of neighboring thing. Let me be clear here. This is not just like a little command. Or this isn't just a rule to follow, or this isn't me being like legalistic, or actually on the other end, it's also not us trying to be like really warm, fuzzy, and just really feel good neighbors. Mike, our youth pastor teased me the other day, Mark, you need to be like Mr. Rogers, and why don't you come out dressed like Mr. Rogers and playing his neighborhood song in the background? If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's a good thing. Maybe I'll do that next Sunday. I don't know. But here's what we're not trying. We're not just trying to be a bunch of Mr. Rogers, though I love Mr. Rogers. Loving your neighbor and being hospitable is actually a response and a result of being transformed by the grace of God. Do we understand the good news of Jesus? Because the reality is this: the gospel should make us great neighbors. The gospel should make us hospitable. When we practice hospitality, here's what's going on. We're modeling the heart of God. When we practice hospitality, we are modeling the hospitality of God. This is the why. Why does this matter? What is the big deal out of this? Those same authors, they say this: by the simple act of opening your door, you are joining in on what God is doing to heal the planet and welcome prodigal sons and daughters back into his family. And I love this. You are turning your home into a wartime hospital where the spiritually hurting can get the hope and care they need. Brothers and sisters, Bridge Church this morning, this sounds cliche, but let's put the word hospital back into hospitality. That's what's going on here when you open up your house. Now, if you're anything like me, you hear this topic of hospitality, here's where my mind goes. My mind immediately goes to Martha Stewart, which, now I'll just stop there. My mind goes there on one hand. My mind goes to a couple other things. Really fancy, expensive china. And I've never understood. My mom had some china out, and here's the deal. The 18 years that I lived at home, we never used it. It just sat on top of the cabinet thing, and I never understood it, and I still don't understand it. But anyways, my mind goes to china. My mind goes to a squeaky clean house. Right? My mind sometimes would go to, like some forced business party that everyone has to go to, but that no one wants to go to. That's what some of us think of hospitality. And I just want to be real this morning. I think for most of us, hospitality, honestly, is a pain. It's a lot of work. Right? I mean, you got to prep. You even got to prep in terms of who you're inviting over. It's a lot of work. It's frustrating. It's time consuming. There's some people who absolutely love it, and it's what gets them energized. But for the vast majority of us, and I think some of that, going back to Rosario's phrase, radical ordinary hospitality, is because I don't think we think of hospitality as ordinary. We think that you got to be the perfect family who puts out the perfect dishware, that doesn't have a stain on their couch. You got to show off your amazing cooking skills. That's what we think about and worry about when it comes to hospitality. I think this is the lie that we've bought into. The lie is this: that for something to be significant, it needs to be extraordinary. For something to be significant, it needs to be extraordinary. Interestingly enough, here's what the Bible says. For something to be significant, it needs to be ordinary. For something to be significant, it needs to be ordinary. So I think actually we practice radical ordinary hospitality when we just make it ordinary. We're actually being radical and countercultural when you say, hey, come on over, my house is a mess. We don't have it together. We got issues, blah, 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 but we want you over here. At that point, you're being radical. Because our culture says, no. Everything needs to be neat when they come in because you wouldn't want to dare put forth the picture that you don't have it all together. Sky Jethani, a pastor, says this so better than I. He says this: we've fallen into the conventional thinking that a big mission demands big tactics. But we forget that in the economy of God's kingdom, big does not beget big. It's precisely the opposite. I love this. The overwhelming message of Jesus' life and teaching is that small begets big. Consider. God's plan to redeem creation, big, is achieved through his incarnation as an impoverished baby, small. Jesus feeds thousands on a hillside, big, with just a few fish and loaves, small. Christ seeks to make disciples of all the nations, big, and he starts with a handful of fishermen, small. Even Goliath, big, is defeated by David with a few small stones, small. Here's the reality this morning. Every single one of us in here right now, we can all practice hospitality. It's one of the reasons why I love this topic, because it doesn't excuse anyone. I mean, just to be blunt. It doesn't matter what age you are or where you live. You could be a 21-year-old college student living in a dorm who has, not only do you have zero money, like you're negative because you're $30,000 in debt with student loans, probably more than that, and you eat top ramen for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You eat it on a couch with ripped holes because you don't have room in your dorm for a kitchen table. That was me in college. You can still show hospitality. If you live in a dorm, in an apartment complex, a retirement community, it doesn't matter where you live or how old you are, you can practice hospitality. Why? Because in the kingdom of God, small begets big. Ordinary is significant. That is good news. We have lost sight of what hospitality means. Hospitality is a welcoming posture and lifestyle. It's not a fancy meal. Now, covered that. Now let's also be honest about this. Practicing hospitality in 2019 in America is very hard. Why is it hard? I think it's hard because our culture, and we don't even realize this, that's part of culture is just shared assumptions that we don't even realize, that there are obstacles and barriers in place that make it hard for us to practice hospitality. We'll go over 4 of them. Here are 4 cultural barriers, 4 ways that every single one of us in here, I think, view our house that prohibits us from practicing hospitality. The first one, isolation. Here's what I mean by this. I think most of us view our house as a place just to kind of be us. It's for privacy, right? You don't want to have to deal with like your annoying coworker. You don't want to have to talk to the dad on your son's Little League team that just constantly talks about his own son, right? Your house is a place for you to get away. Just to be by yourself, to refuel, to have privacy. And let me be clear, that's totally a good desire. There is nothing wrong with that. We need to recharge. Some of us need to be by ourselves for a significant amount of time. That's totally fine. The problem, though, is that I think in America, we have made isolation kind of the dominant framework for how we view our house. That is the lens through which we view our home. And so hospitality doesn't even become a secondary matter. It's not even a secondary thing. It's just, I don't want people in my house. Second one, relaxation. This is related to isolation. This is the one I relate to the most. After a long day of meetings, honestly, I just want to go home and relax. Like, let's order Domino's pizza, glass of wine, put on Netflix, whatever. If you're Mike and you got a jacuzzi or a hot tub in your backyard because someone else gave it to you, boom, you're going right in. Right? Your house it's a retreat center. It's for rest. It's for relaxation. It's to refuel. You don't want to have to, go home and talk to my neighbor or invite him over because that takes energy. And the whole point of my house is to refuel, is to gain back my energy. Some of us primarily view our house as a center for relaxation. Again, nothing wrong with that. Totally nothing wrong with that. I just saw someone raise their hand. God bless you. Third one. Some of us view our house as a place for entertainment. Now, this doesn't mean entertainment in the sense of like having people over and entertain them. It's literally meaning like that's all you do at home. So think of like your TV or just spending time on your phone, your tablet, your laptop, Netflix, whatever. I read this stat a couple of days ago. The average American watches more than 5 hours of television a day. So let's do a little math here. So roughly, I know this isn't true for everyone, roughly you sleep 8 hours, you work 8 hours, okay, and then let's just say 5 hours for TV. That's 21 hours. You have 3 hours left. Well, statistically, we also know that most of us spend more than 3 hours on our phone. So really, your day's already gone. Our house has become a place of entertainment. Someone recently came up with a kind of an official psychological phrase called show hole. And what this describes is people who binge watch Netflix, and you watch your series, you've spent hours and hours doing it at home, and then it ends, and you have like this giant hole in your heart, and you don't know what to do with your time, right? I mean, it's like your best friend just left you, and you're like, whoa, what do I do now? Because you've just consumed your time with all these shows, and you have a hole left in your heart. I won't ask for hands of those of you who watched Game of Thrones. I won't judge you. I probably will. But anyways, hey, Stranger Things, July 4th. Who's ready? Okay. We won't talk about that. But anyways, we watched the trailer last night. Entertainment. Here's the last one. So it's straightforward. Busyness. Honestly, most of us are just too busy. You can't have people over in your house if you're not home, right? So, I mean, some of you right now are thinking, Mark, you don't know my calendar. I don't got time for this. I got kids, grandkids, little league games, dance class. I need to go to the gym. All this other stuff. Again, all completely valid. I have no doubt that you're busy. I get it. But when that becomes the dominant thing of our life, there's no room for hospitality. Now, that's all bad news. Okay? Just went through 4 things, and you're like, whoa, okay. How is this even possible? None of those things are wrong. None of those things are bad. Not like being negative on technology and all that kind of stuff. The issue, though, is that when that becomes the dominant way that we view our house, we lose track of Jesus' invitation to love our neighbor and to be hospitable. The scary and the hard thing about this is we actually have to go against culture. We have to go against culture. We have to reprioritize. My new favorite word is the word contend. We have to contend as followers of Jesus to be hospitable people, because guess what? It's not just going to happen. We're not going to wake up one morning and be like, oh, I got it. This is how I'm going to be hospitable. I have all this time on my schedule. It's not going to happen that way. So here's the question I want us to ask this morning. I think this is the core of it. How do you view your house? How do you view your house? Is your house, or is it God's house? One of the authors says this: are you more prone to see it as a place of retreat or as a weapon for the gospel? Do you see your house as a place of retreat or a weapon for the gospel? Which of those 4 dominant cultural barriers stab you in the heart? Is it isolation? Is it relaxation? Entertainment, or busyness? How do those get in the way for you to open your door for someone who desperately needs Jesus? What if we viewed our house as a hospital designed for care? What if we viewed our house as a mission post for your neighborhood? The last 5 weeks for our house, for Rachel and I, one of the questions I had to think through in this is, okay, what do my neighbors think of me? It's actually a really interesting question to think about. How do my neighbors view me? Do they view me as boring? Do they view me as constantly busy? Do they view me as weird? I don't know. Think of whatever adjective you want, but how do your neighbors view you? Because here's the reality. My neighbors know that I proclaim Jesus, and so the way they view me, they're going to associate with the God that I follow. That could be either really good or really bad. So the last 5 weeks, we've had something at our house where we've gathered neighbors around us who all intentionally don't know Jesus. From various walks of life. Some of them know a little bit about Jesus and Christianity. Some of them have questions. Some of them don't. There's a whole spectrum there. And we'll get more into this in the fall. We're going to kind of unveil a new outreach program here at the Bridge. And so we're kind of piloting it right now at our house on Tuesday nights. There's some people here who've helped out with it. Here's what I've realized. It's very hard. So have Rachel and I had to have conversations about our time and our schedule because now we have another night in our week that's chewed up with people coming over, and we have help. We have someone bringing in food. We have a ton of help. We're not even doing this by ourselves. But I wouldn't have it any other way. There's a little 7-year-old daughter. Her parents are part of the group. And so in order for them to come, the little 7-year-old daughter goes upstairs and Rachel watches her along with Parker. This little girl came up to me this past Tuesday night, and she's incredibly mature. And she's done this multiple times. She says, "Mark, can you give me a hug?" So we do a side hug. And then she says, "I'm so glad that we can come over every Tuesday night." Apparently, she asked Rachel that night, "Hey, are you guys moving anytime soon?" And she was like, "Are you going to be here 2 years from now?" Rachel was like, "Yeah." 5 years from now? "Yeah." And then she started going like 10 years, 15 years. Like, okay, well, we don't know about that one. And she was like, "I don't want you guys to move." Let me end. I started with Rosaria's story. Let me end with a quote from her. "Practicing radically ordinary hospitality is your street credibility with your post-Christian neighbors. It allows you to listen, to keep secrets, to be a safe friend, and to speak a word of grace into dark places. In post-Christian communities, your words can be only as strong as your relationships. Your best weapon is an open door, a set table, a fresh pot of coffee, and a box of Kleenex for the tears that spill." Brothers and sisters, this morning, I want us to end asking this question. What if? What if? What if every single person in this room practiced radical, ordinary hospitality? What if every single one of us in here actually knew our neighbors? What if every single one of us in here actually prayed for our neighbors? What if every single person in here, if our neighbors knew, hey, so-and-so's house, yeah, my kids can go there, that's a safe place. What if every single one of us in here, if our neighbors said, hey, you know what? I feel comfortable going to them and sharing my hurts and my fears, my doubts, my questions. My life is a mess right now. Can you help me? What if that was us? Hospitality, the simplest way to change the world. What if, and I think about this as Carrie was sharing, what if, and I'm being serious, what if non-Christians actually viewed Christian neighbors as like having the best parties? Seriously. What if the kingdom of God invaded our neighborhoods through our houses because they were hospitals of care and a weapon for the gospel? What if? I'm going to invite the music team back up. As always, we head into a time of response. And I think for us, for me, it's just this continual reminder, Mark, God has shown his hospitality to me. Do I have a very real, clear, urgent sense of the grace of God? That God has like welcomed me home as a messed up, jacked up sinner. If that is the case, man, I should be transformed in such a way that I can't but help show that love to my neighbors, regardless of who they are and what they do. Because God can take a Rosaria Butterfield and change her life because someone had her over for dinner. Let me pray for us.